The Weekly Show with David J. Maloney.
This week, David chats with legendary actor Hank Garrett.
And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to The Weekly Show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got actor Hank Garrett joining us once again. Hank's career has seen him face off in fights with some of Hollywood's greatest leading men and in some of the most iconic films and shows of his generation. Spanning the genres from Car 54, Where Are You?, to 3 Days of the Condor, Serpico, and the Emmy-nominated TV show Paris, he has done it all. Back again tonight to chat about his incredible life and career is none other than actor Hank Garrett. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. I was asking you earlier about Serpico. How did Serpico come about, and what do you remember about the first time you met Al Pacino?
I don't recall too much about Serpico, other they wanted a tough cop. Mm-hmm. And I went in and the director looked at me and said, "You got it." I said, "You want me to read?" He said, "You got it. Forget about the read. You got it." He said, "I saw you in a couple of things." He said, "I'm convinced you're the character." And that was it.
Another role which people remember is your role and the fight you have with Robert Redford in 3 Days of the Condor. How did that role come about?
They knew that I'd been a martial artist. The word had gotten out in the business about martial arts background. I trained with some of the greatest fighters in the world. Benny the Jet Urquidez, who was 6-time world champ. I trained with Benny. I trained with some of the best people in martial arts. And next thing I know, I'm getting calls for fight scenes. Wow.
Crazy butterfly effect.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Wow.
One little thing doesn't happen and life takes a completely different path, right?
Oh, yes.
Now, had you ever met Robert Redford before having to fight him in the film?
No.
And the reason why I ask is a lot has been made of that fight scene over the years. I mean, including receiving the New York Film Critics' Best Fight Scene in Film accolade. Can you kind of walk us through what you remember about that fight? I mean, like, did you have to rehearse for it? Was it improvised? When was it choreographed, or was it something that you kind of designed on the day?
I kind of took the lead, and Robert Redford, who is an amazing guy. This is a big star. And I've got to do a fight scene with him. And I have to know when to pull it, because I've never had to do that before. In a fight, I fought. And I got with Redford and he said, "Hank, don't worry." He said, "Just don't knock me out or try to hurt me." I said, "No, I won't." So I had to learn to pull a lot of stuff. And I remember I had to do a reverse kick, and it took the mantle off a piano. So they said, "Well, I don't know about that, Hank, about that." And I said, "Don't you worry about it, I'll do it." And they said, "You're gonna kick the board right off the..." And I said, "Well, I think I can do it." And they said, "Okay, and try not to kill Robert, whatever you do." I said, "I'll never touch him." They said, "You can pull it that badly." I said, "I can do it because my life depends on it, and so does his." And so I had to throw short kicks. The one kick where I take the mantle off, I threw it full out, and sure enough, I took the mantle off the piano. He was wonderful. He said, throw it. I'll just kind of like signal when you're gonna do that, and either I can throw a block or get the hell out of the way. So he was amazing, amazing. A couple of times got clipped. He never said a word. Next day, he said, I'm a little swollen. How? He said, when you threw that roundhouse kick at me, I didn't get out of the way fast enough. Oh God, I'll never work again as long as he said, no, nobody else knows. So, okay. Thank you, Bob. Nicest guy. Couple of times he broke for lunch. When we broke for lunch, I was invited to come with him. There were fans of his all over the place. And it would always be, Mr. Dr. Redford, can we please have one? He said, yes, and Hank Garrett is here. He said, who? He said, it's the guy I have the big fight scene with. Oh yeah, can we have his autograph? Had he not mentioned that, they wouldn't know who the heck I was.
This might be a throwaway question, but you also acted with an absolute blockbuster cast in The Sentinel. I mean, the film had Ava Gardner, Christopher Walken, Jeff Goldblum, John Carradine, just to name a few. How did that role find its way to you?
I was recommended. A lot of people who were big fans of Condor. And the fight scene with Bob. That opened doors for so many places because Robert Redford was one of the biggest stars in the business at that time. He had such respect. His agent started submitting me for different things. And it was a dream come true. Here I am, in the streets of Harlem, hoodlum. The fact that I went into an audition and I didn't realize I had either a switchblade knife in my pocket or a gun. Became part of what I got dressed with. Didn't go out in that street until I had something in my pocket. Oh, it took a long time for me to forget that kind of life. It's what kept me alive. Because so many of the guys I grew up with were not here any longer. A couple of times we were standing on the street and a car came through. We were on the street. I'm standing in front of there was a car, a friend of mine had a car, and we were looking at the car, and this car came through, and they opened fire. Firing out of both windows, both sides, trying to hit anybody that they possibly could. They put bullet holes in the car we were looking at, so had they not been moving that fast, they would have hit us. But they did put 2 or 3 bullet holes in the car. And and a couple of the guys yelled, we know who it is, get in the car, man, let's go. Come on, Hank. I said, no, thank you. No, I'm not getting involved in that. I went home. Lived on a 5th floor walk-up. My mother and father were in a market selling fruits and vegetables. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what I was doing. And God, I met some people that got me off the street. And I went to a place I never forgot. At the school, I lived on 111th, and right on 111th Street, there was a school. And at night, the school was open. There was a gym, and there was a guy who was kind of an instructor. And I came in to see what this was all about, because they said, oh, you can play ping pong for nothing and play checkers and other stuff and basketball. And I came to take a look. And here I am, I'm like 12 or 13 years old, big, getting big. And I met one of the coaches. And he said, well, what do you do? I said, well, I'm going to school. He said, where? And I told him. He said, no, are you staying in school? I said, yeah. If I left, it would break my mother's heart. He said, how'd you like to hang out? I said, doing what? He said, you're looking like you're working out. I said, yeah. He said, well, come down here. You can work out here. I've got all equipment. So I went in. I didn't have to join a gym. Start working out with this guy. Next thing he said, what do you know about martial arts? I said, what's martial arts? He said, karate. I said, well, no, I don't. He said, would you like to study? I said, yeah. He says, there's a guy in your neighborhood who's a very dear friend of mine. He's the teacher, the sensei. So he said, I want you to go see him. It's not going to cost you anything. You tell him you're my friend. And I started training. It got me off the street, and I was training 6 days a week. And I became very proficient. So much so that I was able to enter competition. And I was competing and beating other schools. So that was my introduction, which pulled me off the street.
One of the other shows I wanted to ask you about was the TV show Paris with James Earl Jones. And the more I learn about that show, the more I've found people saying how incredible of a show it was. What do you remember about that show, and how did that role come about for you?
I'm not very clear on it, truly.
Do you remember much about James Earl Jones in the first time?
Yeah, I was in awe of James.
What hit you first, his voice or the very stature of the man?
The voice, I'd heard the voice, very distinct voice. And when I was told I had an audition, there's a new show with James Earl Jones. They're looking for a guy to play his partner. You're going to be a detective with James Earl Jones. I'm going to work with James Earl Jones. Yes.
And this was about a year after Star Wars, right? I mean,
yes.
So, I mean, I'm curious if when you hear his voice, even all these years later, do you hear the voice of your co-star, or do you hear Darth Vader, or maybe Mufasa, or this is CNN? Which voice do you hear?
Wow. I had heard James on a couple of commercials. And I said, wow, what an amazing voice. His deep, booming voice. He said, well, his father was an actor. Oh. He said, but James Earl became a big star. Broadway, off-Broadway. And he's going to do this series now. And there's a role we'd like you to read for. Okay, I read and oh my God. They said, before I said thank you, and I started to leave, and someone from the audition room came running out after me and said, you got it. They want you to play James Earl Jones' partner. I said, get out of here. I said, no, seriously. They called my agent, who submitted me, and said that you have the part of James Earl Jones' partner. And wow.
Well, I was going to ask you, we're talking about all of this history and how these things came about. I mean, I'm curious, what sticks out to you about the kind of roles you got to play back then? I mean, do you think those kinds of roles still exist today?
I could not believe any of the things that were happening. I knew I was a comic. That was my bent. I became a comic because I didn't want to get beat up all the time on the streets. And I became good at being a comic. And suddenly you want me to play a very straight and serious role opposite one of the best actors in the business. And they said, if we didn't believe you could do it, we wouldn't offer it to you. I never had much confidence in myself. Never did. And suddenly, this is being told to me. This role is thrust. They're waiting my acceptance. I never had that happen in my life. I was always pushed aside when it came to anything. You're too big, you're too small, you're not the right size, you're not the right rate. And suddenly, you're perfect.
Did you eventually find the confidence? Through doing all of these things, did you eventually get to the point where you're like, okay, obviously they're picking me for these things. I must be worthy of this in some way. Or did you always feel insecure in that way?
I always felt insecure. So many, many, many times. How many times I've said to myself, they're going to learn about the real you, and
They're going to figure it out.
they're going to take a pass. Oh, every time I went in for an audition, I would read the part and I'd go, oh man, this is not me. And then a friend of mine, who was a wonderful actor, and he said, you got to believe in yourself, man. Agents are not going to submit you if you were not right for the part. And I thought, they're submitting me because I'm a nice guy, yeah, they're going to be submitting a bunch of other people as well. So I forever had no confidence. I tried my best. For sure, that I was good at, but it was called trying, not winning. And suddenly, one day, my wife said, look, if you weren't right, they wouldn't submit you. And if you weren't right, the people wouldn't want to see you. The people that are doing the casting. Well, you're right. Most of my life, my young life, I was wrong. I was wrong for the neighborhood. I was wrong in so many areas of my life. Meeting young ladies and asking for a date and being turned down. Some would accept and we'd have a fun time. But there was so much negative about my existence. I was born late in life to my mother and father. So I was an accident. That was what I was told. So that kind of mood kept coming up for me. You're all wrong for this. You're all wrong. No, you're not. You're right. But try to convince me of that. If I'm accepted at something right now, I consider myself very lucky. Not saying, yeah, why not? I'm right for it and I deserve it. No, I just say, oh God, I'm lucky to get that. So that's the kind of life that I've led. I'm just very, very lucky, really.
Let's talk a little bit more about your book. How did the idea for writing a book come about?
My wife, when I told her about some of the stuff that I've done, she was encouraging. She said, first of all, it's hard to believe that you did that many things. And we started talking about a book, she and I. She did all the typing. I started writing everything down on a piece of paper, on a pad, and she did all the correction. She wrote the book. It's an amazing, amazing lady. Because every few pages, she would stop and say, now wait a minute. Wait a minute. How old were you when you carried a gun? And I said, 12. She said, now think about it. 12, you had a gun? I said, yeah, one of the mob guys on the street gave me a 25 caliber pistol. So she questioned me about just about everything. She wrote the book. I just gave her the stories of my life. She put it into prose. And people who have read the book were truly astounded. They're saying, you did these things. I said, yeah. I didn't think about it when I did it. I just did it.
It's amazing how you went from the streets of Harlem, to working with Sammy Davis Jr. to, working with people like Al Pacino and Robert Redford and James Earl Jones. I mean, and I'm sure the book is going to have some of those stories, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I tried to touch upon some of them a little bit in the show today, but for those who want to get the whole story, make sure you buy that book.
Yes. They can get me directly, hankgarrett.biz, autographed, and they can get it for $25.
Well, we'll put that up on the screen for everybody to see. And I so much appreciate you being on the show with us today, Hank. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for taking the time to talk with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Hank Garrett.
Thank you so much.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching this. Special thanks to actor Hank Garrett for joining us once again. Stay safe, everyone.